Hi everybody. My name is Julia Jessen. I am the Curator of Collections and Exhibitions at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art. Thank you so much for joining me tonight for this one night stand presentation. This is a series of presentations that we do at the Cedar Rapids Museum of Art where we focus on one work of art and one artist for one night. Tonight is a little bit different. These presentations often focus on a work of art currently on display in one of our exhibitions, but tonight I'm focusing on a work of art that's always on display, the Carnegie Building. Today, June 24th, 2025, marks 120 years since the Carnegie Library building opened to the public, and we wanted to celebrate that by using this program to really focus in on the building. So tonight I'm going to talk to you a bit about how the Carnegie Building came to be, its history, and point out some of the details of this building. As a note, the sources that I'm relying on for this presentation are the Cedar Rapids Public Library's First 100 Years book, an essay by Harold F. Ewalt, Gazette articles, the library's webpage, and various other sources. So the building story starts with the need for a public library. Early settlers of the city in the 1840s and 50s had been unable to bring many books with them. They were a scarce commodity and they were very highly treasured. And so institutions sprung up that included books. The Masonic Library is one that was put in place in 1876. There was also the Co-College Library, local high schools, and the YMCA, but no public library. And attempts were also made for subscription libraries, but they eventually failed. Throughout this time, public interest in a library had been growing. Enter Ada Van Vechten. So Ada Van Vechten was the wife of a prominent businessman, but she was very involved in the arts and culture spheres of Cedar Rapids in her own right. You may also be somewhat familiar with her as the mother of Carl Van Vechten. We do have a show up right now at the CRMA that features some of Carl's photography in conjunction with the photography of George T. Henry. So a very kind of cultured, artistic household. And by the end of 1894, there was a group of women who were really interested in initiating a campaign to think more about the founding of a public library. In January of 1895, Ada Van Vechten organized the City Federation of Ladies Literary Clubs. The Federation combined 8 literary clubs into one organization, and their express objective was the promotion and establishment of a public library. And so they were working on this through a huge variety of ways. They organized concerts, they held different events, they circulated petitions, and they canvassed the city. The petition that they created was presented to the city council, and they were eventually persuaded to put the matter to a vote in 1896. So this is pretty interesting. There wasn't any guarantee that it would pass at all. Many citizens were indifferent. Others were strongly opposed to a new public library. They thought it would cost too much and they didn't see a need for it, viewing other institutions in the city as being adequate library facilities. And so it was definitely not a guaranteed outcome at all. And the women played a huge role, not only in organizing beforehand, but also in the vote itself. So in 1894, the women of Iowa were given the right to vote on limited tax issues. Iowa was one of only 2 states that passed this limited tax suffrage. And the legislation stated that women could vote on municipal bond and tax issues on borrowing money or increasing the tax levy. So in this case, women could vote on this issue. And had it not been for the women canvassing the city and the women being able to vote, the levy probably wouldn't have passed. And it did, but by a very narrow margin of only 59 votes. So there was 1,105 for and 1,046 against, but the library issue carried. And so the city council had no alternative but to implement a city library. And even the Gazette reported that the returns showed that half the men who voted didn't vote on the question at all. They said, quote, "Had it not been for the efforts of the women themselves, who voted in every ward in the city, the proposition would undoubtedly have been lost," end quote. So there was still some dissent. Some were disgruntled that women could vote on the issue at all. But throughout the controversy, throughout the dissent, Ada Van Vechten persisted. She continued to push forward with this cause that was very dear to her. And that's not to say that there were no men who supported the issue. There was a men's organization, the Good Government Club, who supported their proposal in the Gazette. And I'm sure other men also supported this in different forums as well. But the women were really a major force in getting this done. And Ada would become the president of the library board, and she would hold the position until her death in 1905. So the public library was initially established in a rented room on the second floor of the Granby building with about 1,300 books in 1897. And it was so successful that it fairly quickly had to move to larger quarters in the Dow's Auditorium, which is what you're seeing here in this image. But they still were needing a home of their own. So in 1901, the library sent a letter to business tycoon turned philanthropist Andrew Carnegie. He had been providing funds to cities for the creation of public libraries. And Carnegie's private secretary responded and let them know that if Cedar Rapids could pledge itself by ordinance of its council to support a library from taxation at a cost of not less than $5,700 a year and provide a suitable site, Mr. Carnegie would be glad to give $50,000 for a building. And 50,000 was pretty standard for what he was offering for these library buildings. So then the question became where to put this library. There was a lot of conversation that went on with that, whether it was the east side or the west side. And one place that was seriously considered was Mays Island. It was actually so seriously considered that Carnegie was contacted about placing the library here. So in June of that year, he was contacted about that. And the letter related the excitement about this idea. And they also let him know, because the city was doing very well, there was a lot doing very well financially, and kind of a growing, burgeoning city. And they thought that they would actually be able to provide $7,500 a year to maintain the new library. So they asked Carnegie if he would be willing to increase his gift to 75,000 rather than the 50,000 that he had initially promised. So Carnegie actually agreed. Um, our library, the Carnegie Library in Cedar Rapids, is a little larger than some of the other Carnegie libraries that you might see. It's one of only a few in Iowa that was completed for that larger amount. So he had agreed to this plan. However, in the spring of 1902, the Cedar River flooded and the Mays Island building site lost its appeal. So they had to reach back out to Carnegie to approve a revised plan. In 1903, the City Council had endorsed the Library Board's decision to locate the new library on the northwest corner of what was commonly known as the Ely Corner. This was the corner of 2nd Avenue and 5th Street. And so they had already reached out to Carnegie. They had notified him of this site. They sent him a map of the city showing this site with the little park right there. At the time, it was the Washington Square Park, Union Station, the high school building, and the churches that would neighbor the new library. The board was pleased with the site. Carnegie was pleased with the site. And so then they were able to prepare to break ground for the new building as soon as the ground thawed the following spring. They had hired the architect Henry S. Jocelyn of the Jocelyn and Taylor Company, and he and 3 members of the library board's building committee would travel out to other important libraries in the West to look at details of those buildings, including plans, building materials, heating, lighting, ventilation systems, and more. They wanted to incorporate the most successful features into the new library building. So construction started, and as construction was ongoing, spectators would regularly watch. But the cornerstone, inscribed 1904, was laid with fairly little ceremony. There was a tin box that was placed in a repository under the cornerstone, and library board members and a few others gathered to watch the stone being lowered. The tin box contained copies of the library's first 7 annual reports, local newspapers, a new World's Fair postage stamp, and small 1904 coins. Construction continued, and they worked very hard. Here you're seeing some early images of the library once it was completed. By November, the Venetian workers were laying a terrazzo floor. The building was coming together, very much as you see in these early photos of what it was looking like. And the Gazette was also describing the library building. So about the second floor, they were talking about and saying, quote, on the second floor was the art gallery. And here, just a note, you're seeing an image from a little later on in the 20th century. You might have been able to tell from this mid-century modern furniture. But on the second floor was the art gallery, where the Cedar Rapids Art Association could host its exhibitions, and an auditorium seating about 500. The auditorium on the east of the second floor measured 36 by 59 feet. The stage on the north end protected 2 dressing rooms. Lectures and educational activities would grace the auditorium. In the basement were janitors and toilet rooms. Extra space was designed for storage, and that completed the basement. End quote. The staff readied the library for the dedication ceremony and for circulation opening on June 24th, 1905. And here you're seeing a later photo from about 1910. Throughout this process, Ada Van Vechten, of course, had been a huge supporter of the library, the president of the board. However, she had also been in increasingly poor health, but she was able to attend the opening ceremonies. She would die later that year in November of 1905. And in 1907, a stained glass window was actually dedicated to her memory. You're seeing that on the right side of your screen. And that was placed in the library as well. So Carnegie Library buildings are often constructed in a number of different styles, including Beaux Arts, Italian Renaissance, Baroque, Classical Revival, and Spanish Colonial, to enhance their appearance as public buildings. Each style is generally chosen by the community in which it exists. The architecture was typically simple and formal, trying to welcome patrons through a prominent doorway, usually accessed via a staircase from the ground level. The entry staircase symbolized a person's elevation through learning. And similarly, most libraries had a lamppost or a lantern installed near the entrance, meant as a symbol of enlightenment. And you can definitely see some of those things here as well with this Carnegie Library. So at the time, early on, as it was being constructed, the library was described as, quote, the building is Renaissance in style, and the lines are simple and dignified. The exterior of mottled light buff brick of Norman size from Columbus, Ohio, with the basement, the window trimming, and the cornice of Bedford stone, end quote. Ada Van Vechten told the city council that the exterior was, quote, so plain and dignified that we feel sure that it will meet with your approval, end quote. And in the Gazette of April 4th, 1905, they wrote, quote, the approach and entrance to the library will in itself be a magnificent creation. On each side of the entrance are 2 beautiful marble columns, and on the right and left, as one enters the vestibule, the walls are encased with marble. An artistic iron gate will also lend elegance to the entrance. Practically the entire first floor will be devoted to the book and reading rooms. The children's reading room will be located on the left after entering the building, and on the right is the reading room, while the stacks will be found in a recess behind the delivery desk. The reading rooms are also fitted with cases, each about 6 feet in height, which makes them easily accessible. Both rooms will be very commodious and will withstand the growth of the library for many years. The entire first floor has been arranged with an eye to convenience, yet no space has been sacrificed, end quote. So despite these various different descriptions, the architecture style has typically been described as Italian Renaissance, but also described as a subdued Beaux Arts kind of style. And these different styles also kind of borrow different things from each other and have similarities between them as well. But what we see as we look at it is a pretty classical looking exterior, a lot of symmetry going on here, both sides being the same, classical details coming through. We have classic columns on the front in a variety of different orders. And at the top, Roman numerals that indicated the building was constructed in 1904. A flat roof, and then a large sculpture of an open book at the top. Immediately below the roof perimeter is a band of names from classic authors: Homer, Dante, Virgil, Shakespeare, Irving, Goethe, Kamensky, which was a nod to the Czech population in Cedar Rapids, and Bjornson, who had won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1903. You'll also notice here the dentils there, kind of along the roof line, those little blocks, as well as the columns that you're seeing there too, with these sort of Corinthian style capitals. These are also carried through to the interior, as well as other small decorative details, like what you're seeing here on both sides of your screen, an exterior shot on the left, and then an interior shot on the right. And of course, on the interior, the columns are a major feature of the space, sort of a forest of columns that we have here. But they have these very interesting capitals, so the top part of the column. They're quite elongated compared to what you usually see. So they go up in this kind of spiraling flourish, and it makes the space feel longer, feel higher, kind of lifts our eye as we're looking up, makes it feel like a taller ceilinged space. We also have, oops, and there's a detail of those elongated column capitals. We also have arches carving out our pathway through the space. The art glass rotunda, and it's my understanding that this is a recreation of the original. The shelves in the space are original, kind of paying homage and honoring the original purpose of the building. We do still keep some books here that people are welcome to explore as they sit and kind of relax in the space. The fireplace as well is original. The colors too were sort of matched to what they think the original colors were. And the sculpture above the fireplace as well is also original. The sculptures to either side of the fireplace are part of a Malvina Hoffman frieze, her Bacchanal frieze. Those are not original to the space, but we display them in the Carnegie side of the building. But the sculpture above the fireplace is, and it seems to be perhaps inspired by Andrea della Robbia's sculptures adorning the facade of Florence's Foundling Hospital, which was founded in 1419. And he did a series of variations on this kind of baby in swaddling clothes theme throughout these little roundels along the surface of this loggia. And so that's kind of similar to what we have here above the fireplace. Seems to be perhaps inspired by that. Something that makes sense for sure at a foundling hospital, but it's maybe a little more unclear why that would be incorporated into a library setting. But perhaps it had something to do with the library's strong focus on children, children's literacy. I think you heard from some of those quotes how much the children's area was being emphasized as well. So that could have had something to do with it. Also, in the auditorium, you can kind of make it out in this photo, but there is some original bas-relief sculpture in this area too, just above the two doors to either side of the stage. And I have a contemporary photo here so you can get a better look at what I'm talking about. Um, but this sculpture incorporates owls, books, and torches. And this is meant to invoke that idea of enlightenment and gaining knowledge through books. So all of these different details coming together to tie in with the purpose of the building and what you're meant to do inside of the building as well. And the people leading the library paid a lot of attention to aesthetics and to these different things. Grant Wood, too, would speak about the pictures that would be hanging in the art gallery on the second floor, but also there was artwork throughout the building. So in this photo, I wanted to point out that there is a painting hanging on the wall to the right. So there were also paintings hung throughout the space. This is actually a work that's still in our collection today. So these are things that were worked throughout the entire space and not just in the art gallery as well. The library would spend 80 years in the Carnegie building, and multiple changes would take place throughout that time. So the next few photos are kind of showing how the library grew, going into the 70s, into the 80s, giving you a sense of how much it's grown in that time. So here we're seeing the reference desk. Here is the checkout desk, and you can see how many books and all the shelves that have come into the space in that time. And I believe, if I'm understanding our angle right here, we're looking toward what would be the corner of the store today if you were to walk into the building. So the entrance looks like it's just there on the right corner of the image cut off there. And in fact, they had so many books that they added a mezzanine level in the space. And you can see that. You can see the arches that we were looking at before, but here a mezzanine has been added so they could fit more books into the space. And so, really, by the 80s, they're kind of bursting at the seams. They're starting to really outgrow this space. And that was something that had been kind of going on for a while. Even in the 20s, there on the left, you're seeing that the children's section had actually moved up into the Carnegie Auditorium because they needed more space on the main floor. So even at that time, they were moving things around to make more space. On the right, you're seeing the Carnegie Auditorium, decades later, with shelves in the space, carts in the space. So really just pushing the space to its maximum capacity. Um, so there were multiple failed bond issues trying to get funding to create either to expand the library or to create a new library. And so eventually the Hall Foundation of Cedar Rapids pledged a 6.8 million grant over 10 years to build a new library. This location would be at the corner of First Street and Fifth Avenue Southeast. So that's where it would be. Then the flood of 2008 happened, and then they moved to their current location, which is just overlooking the park and overlooking their original location, which is the Carnegie Building. So those two buildings face each other, which is really lovely. The library would move out of the Carnegie Building in 1985. And then this building would be restored in 1989 to become part of the new Museum of Art. And the Art Association had a long history both with the library and with the Carnegie Building, really from the beginning. As you heard throughout the presentation, they maintained the gallery in the building until the 60s, when they moved to the Torch Press building. And so for a time here, the Carnegie Building just stands empty until the decision was made to incorporate it into an enlarged art museum. Oop, and there's an early exhibition catalog, 1912. But the refurbishing of the Carnegie Building, excuse me, and the design of the new museum was done by the architect Charles W. Moore and Centerbrook Architects and Planners. Moore was an internationally recognized postmodern architect who is known for a talent of combining old and new structures, perfect for what they were looking for here. And he said, quote, "We wanted for Cedar Rapids something that would be a truly public building and unlike the closed up buildings that people think of when they think of museums. We thought of the new building as being a fairly simple match to the 1904 Carnegie Library, but we really didn't want to do it as classical. We were interested in having the same traditional architectural parts, like the base, the middle, and the capitals," end quote. So here you're seeing an image of the construction taking place on this enlarged art museum with this new addition being added. And the composition of the exterior is really trying to integrate these three different spaces: the Carnegie Building on the right, the gallery wing on the left, and then the atrium in the center. And they're doing that through a few different things, through a palette of analogous colors with complementary hues, as well as accent hues kind of thrown in. The architects also kind of further articulated and unified the facades using horizontal and vertical patterning and abstracting some of the classical elements that could be found on the Carnegie side of the building in this kind of postmodern way in the new edition, in the gallery wing and in the atrium as well. So they took forms like cornices and entablatures, friezes, columns, column capitals, and abstracted them in this sort of late 80s postmodern way. Um, and we see some of that on the exterior. You can see that in kind of the lighter areas there, where it takes on some of the same forms that we're seeing on the Carnegie side of the building as well. But also, even in the atrium, where we have these very bright colors, the bright red, purple, contrasted with more pastel beige and lime green striping. But here too, we have this dense forest of columns, kind of like our Carnegie side of the building. We also have these really interesting columns with, again, these elongated capitals. So, very much like the columns in the Carnegie, you have these exaggerated, elongated capitals, really lengthening the space, making it feel like the height is kind of stretching up to the ceiling there. And that's something that's very much paying homage to those original capitals in the Carnegie side of the building. So all of these things being put together to really tie these very disparate spaces together into one. And of course, additional changes would take place over the intervening years. An education entrance would be added in 2003. Various other kind of restoration projects would take place. But altogether, this has been over a century of fascinating history. Here I've presented just what could fit into this fairly short presentation. And of course, there's always many more stories to share. But keep in mind that you can always experience the Carnegie during our open hours, and you don't even need to pay admission to visit that side of the building. So you can come in, enjoy, check it out, and also maybe notice some of these details for yourself. And I'm sure you'll also discover things that I didn't talk about tonight as well. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you all so much for listening tonight, and celebrating the birthday of the Carnegie Building. I so appreciate it. It was great to delve into this topic. I learned a lot throughout this process too. And I hope that you'll come back and maybe spend a little more time looking around on that side of the building. So thank you so much for joining me, and have a wonderful rest of your evening. Goodbye.